In Boston today, confusion erupted over conflicting accounts that there'd been a major break in the investigation of the bombings earlier this week. Early this afternoon, crowds gathered outside the federal courthouse in South Boston amid reports that a suspect had been identified by security camera video, then arrested and even taken to court. But the FBI shot down claims that anyone was in custody, and it issued a statement that said, in part, since these stories often have unintended consequences, we ask the media to exercise caution and attempt to verify information.
Another 100 yards.
The Bureau also put off an afternoon briefing, citing a bomb scare that forced everybody out of the courthouse. Earlier, the FBI released photos of remnants of the bombs made out of pressure cookers and the black nylon bags that concealed them. One of the pressure cooker lids was catapulted to a nearby rooftop. And investigators kept sifting the crime scene for more clues today. All three people killed in the bombings have now been identified: 8-year-old Martin Richard, 29-year-old Crystal Campbell, and Lu Lingzi, a Chinese graduate student at Boston University. Last night, neighbors and friends of Martin Richard and his family held a candlelight vigil near a baseball diamond and field where he used to play.
Everybody knows them, everybody loves them. It's just unthinkable. Such, anybody's little boy was our little boy.
Boston Common was the site of another vigil last night. Several hundred turned out to sing and pay tribute to those killed and the more than 170 injured.
Bostonians and people who are here are resilient, and we come together in the hardest times and the best times. So, it's still great to be a Bostonian.
And in Washington today, Secretary of State John Kerry, who also calls Boston home, spoke emotionally at a congressional hearing.
The granddaughter of a very, very close supporter and friend of mine through all of my political career is fighting to keep both of her legs. Boston is not going to be intimidated by this, but we're going to find out who did this.
Many of the injured who were treated at area hospitals have now been released. But doctors said a number are facing new surgeries and other threats.
So now what we're doing with these patients is evaluating their wounds to see, making sure that there's not any other processes going on, trying to prevent infection, then allowing them to be for these wounds to heal, and then eventually for these patients to have their wounds closed and then to start the rehabilitation process.
Meanwhile, makeshift memorials sprang up at the entrance of the still-closed Boylston Street, where the marathon had its finish line. People left flowers, flags, posters, and race medals. And there were memorials of another kind from runners.
I was going to run along the river, and I kind of felt an obligation to run along the boundary of the police cordon. I just felt like something that's drawing runners to respect the people that were hurt and respect the people in the race.
Elsewhere in the nation, tensions remained high. In Oklahoma City, where a truck bombing killed 168 people in 1995, buildings were evacuated after a U-Haul truck was parked outside City Hall. It turned out to be empty. And we're joined from Boston once again tonight by David Boeri, a reporter for WBUR Public Radio. He's been covering the turn of events all day. Well, David, a very confusing day. What is the latest about whether anyone is now in custody or identified as a suspect? What can you tell us?
Jeff, at this point, both the FBI and the U.S. Attorney here in Boston insist there have been no arrests made. Nobody is in custody. However, there is a lot of confusion regarding this and reports that we've had throughout the day.
What about some of these reports involved images that were caught of somebody with the bag that has now been identified?
We started the day with news reports that the detonation for those pressure cookers had been a timing device, that a circuit board had been found and it was a timing device. So far, so good. Then we started to get reports independently that there had been images of a man seen putting a duffel bag close to one of the areas where the bombing took place, and also that there was an image, that there was great surveillance video from a Lord & Taylor shop that was near the area that had also shown activity. Then that led to reports, again by a number of independent sources, that there had been an arrest made. So the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office came in, knocked the story down. However, I had gone over to the U.S. courthouse here, being told, in fact, that there was an arrest. And while I was there, I was told by 2 senior judges and 2 other senior officials that, in fact, they had been told to prepare for somebody being brought over in connection to the bombing. A courtroom was being prepared, and they were even preparing an overflow courtroom at the time. That's when we got a code red alert in the courthouse. An evacuation took place, an evacuation because a threat that had been made that was deemed credible, and the building was evacuated at that point. And by the way, that building has the U.S. Attorney's Office in it.
Well, all of these reports coming out, rumors swirling, law enforcement officials are clearly quite upset with news organizations for getting too far ahead of things.
That's true. We were lectured by the FBI national headquarters, and also the U.S. Attorney's Office here said we don't know where the story came from. And yet I can tell you that at the courthouse, 2 senior judges and 2 other senior officials told me they had been told, prepare, we are bringing somebody over. I think perhaps we can say from this, or it would be an indication, maybe there's nobody in custody, maybe no arrests have been made, but perhaps we are close to some real progress in this case that might involve an arrest, but there is none now. The press conference that the U.S. Attorney had called for this afternoon was postponed. We don't know when it will take place. The courthouse is closed. The public will not be allowed there tonight, so it would not seem that anything is going to happen at the courthouse either.
Well, hearing different versions or different reports coming out, it is clear who's in charge. Is the FBI in charge of this?
FBI is supposed to be in charge of this, but, you know, as that bomb threat, that code red alert indicated, with the U.S. Attorney's Office being forced to evacuate, there's a lot of turmoil here right now, a lot of confusion. One would think that they'll have a press conference soon because they need to address some of these reports that were made by a number of independent sources that indicated that they had somebody. Perhaps it wasn't an arrest, perhaps nobody in custody. There's the possibility that they're talking to somebody voluntarily and maybe close to something.
So they had canceled or at least postponed that late afternoon news conference, but they may still talk tonight?
We are waiting for them. They said that it was postponed. Well, if it's postponed, it will be rescheduled for tonight, but it hasn't been rescheduled yet. And there is, at the same time, Jeff, there's a tremendous amount of work being done on the images. They have a terrific amount of images right now. And as one forensic expert told me, Boston is now the most photographed crime scene in history.
Well, we talked a little bit about this yesterday. They, of course, the law enforcement asking for the public to help. So these images coming from the public, they're coming from local stores, they're coming where? Give us a sense.
That's right, from both, from individuals, from stores, from surveillance cameras. If I can give you an example, Jeff, the closest analog to this is what happened in the city of Vancouver 2 years ago. After the Bruins beat the Canucks in the Stanley Cup. Fans rioted in downtown Vancouver. They set fires, they overturned cars, they broke glass. It was a chaotic moment. The police there put out a call for photos and videos. They obtained 5,000 hours of video and over 100,000 photos. They then brought in national experts. There were 53 experts that worked full-time for 3 weeks, and at the end of the time, they had identified 15,000 criminal acts. Of course, this behavior is explicit, but 15,000 criminal acts. They tagged the individuals, and they made charges that brought over 350 people into court. This is far bigger, but that's an example of what you can do with photographs and photographic analysis.
And just very briefly, David, yesterday we talked about the crime scene. Is it still as large as it was?
The crime scene is very large. Of course, they're working in that close area where the 2 bomb blasts were. Fortunately, we have not had really bad weather. Rain was expected last night. Often rain is considered to have ruined a crime scene. It didn't happen. There's been some wind, but they still have that crime scene. It is still relatively intact.
David Boeri, WBUR, thank you very much once again.
You're welcome.